welcome. I'm Ellie Richardson and you are watching the World Report on NewsX World. Let's take a look at some of the top headlines of this hour. The US military commander in the Middle East has said that American forces have struck nearly 2,000 targets so far in Iran as part of the largest firepower build-up in the region in a generation. Lebanese militant group Hezbollah has targeted northern Israel's Haifa naval base in response to the Israeli military's ongoing strikes against Iran-backed movement strongholds in Lebanon, including the southern suburbs of Beirut. The United States has started facilitating charter flights from a number of countries in the Middle East for US citizens stranded in the region as Washington's joint military strikes with Israel and Iran have severely disrupted global air travel. The move came 4 days after the US-Israel air war on Iran began. Britain is deploying HMS Dragon, an air defence destroyer, to Cyprus after the runway of its Akroti base there was hit by an Iranian-made drone. Prime Minister Keir Starmer said he was sending the naval vessel along with the helicopters with counter-drone capabilities to the region as the conflict in the Middle East intensifies. The dollar rallied to a 3-month high in early trading in Asia, with investors retreating from the euro as the growing conflict in the Middle East sparked fears of a sustained rise in energy prices. The euro traded down, extending losses into a third day after earlier hitting its weakest since late November. US Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick has agreed to testify in the congressional inquiry of convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein. The former New York financier has faced pressure over his associations with the late Epstein, especially after publicly released files undercut his claims of when he had severed ties with him. The Trump administration is quietly building a legal case against Venezuelan interim President Delcy Rodriguez, including readying a draft criminal indictment. Federal prosecutors have put together possible corruption and money laundering charges and have communicated to Rodriguez that she is at risk of prosecution unless she continues to comply with Trump's demands. And we start this hour with some breaking news. The US Army Reserve Command press desk has released photos identifying 4 fallen soldiers as Sergeant First Class Nicole Amor, Sergeant Declan Cody, Captain Cody Cork, and Sergeant First Class Noah Teachdens. The attack targeted their position while they were carrying out military operations in the Kuwait port of Shuaibia in a drone. The US Army has honoured these heroic soldiers for their sacrifice. Some more breaking news now. A drone strike hit a parking area adjacent to the US consulate in Dubai late Tuesday, the third American diplomatic facility targeted within 48 hours. US Secretary of State Marco Rubio confirmed that a fire broke out near the Chancellery building, but all personnel was safe and accounted for. Similar drone and missile strikes were reported earlier this week at the US embassies in Riyadh and Kuwait. Dubai authorities, including the Dubai Media Office, said emergency teams quickly contained the blaze and no injuries were reported. And now for your top stories this hour. US President Donald Trump has warned that the worst case scenario for Iran could be the emergence of a new leader, as dangerous as the late Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei, who was killed in an airstrike on February the 28th. Speaking alongside German Chancellor Friedrich Merz, Trump stated that Iran's military capabilities had been significantly weakened, with the US forces targeting missile stockpiles and launch sites. Trump acknowledged the volatility of the situation and advised Iranians against protesting, citing the dangers of ongoing airstrikes. He emphasized that the US wanted a better future for Iran, but warned that the outcome could still lead to leadership no better than the previous regime. Let's now listen to what the US president had to say.
I don't know if this is a worst case. We have them very much beaten militarily from the military standpoint. They're still lobbing some missiles. At some point, they won't even be able to do that because we're hitting all of their carriers. We're hitting all of their missile stock. You know, they built up all these missiles over the last few years. They had a lot of them. They've shot a lot of them, and we're knocking out a lot. I guess the worst case would be we do this, and then somebody takes over who's as bad as the previous person, right? That could happen. We don't want that to happen. It would probably be the worst. You go through this, and then in 5 years you realize you put somebody in who was no better. So we'd like to see somebody in there that's going to bring it back for the people. And we'll see what happens with the people. You know, they have their chance. We've said, don't do it yet. If you're going to go out and protest, don't do it yet. It's very dangerous out there. A lot of bombs are being dropped. But I would say that would be about the worst.
We are now being joined by Adrian Calamel, who's a fellow Arabian Peninsula Institute and terrorism scholar, joining us from New York. Thank you so much for joining us here today on NewsX World. We've just obviously heard Trump say that the worst thing Iran can do is get a leader like Khamenei. Can the elimination of Iranian leadership during military strikes realistically lead to a moderate successor, or does history suggest hardline replacements are more likely?
Well, first of all, good morning to you, Ellie, and to your viewers. Yeah, you know, I watched that press conference today, and it took, you know, the question, it took Trump quite a while to answer that. And when you see these type of operations, yeah, that's always, he was quite frank and said, yeah, that is the worst case scenario, that, you know, the devil that is replaced is worse than the devil that you know. I could almost point to Syria in that situation where, you know, Assad was the devil that we know, and then now we have somebody else. But I will say with Iran, they have a long history of statehood, over 2,500 years. There's people who do not understand the IRGC. There's a layer up at the top, and then there's middle management, and there's layers underneath. And there's these layers that are underneath in the middle management. They are individuals that have been cut out of the economy. They've been cut out of any opportunities for advancement. There's a glass ceiling there. And then there's all the individuals that work under them that aren't part of the guards. So it's a different approach that's been taken here. This is decapitation strikes by taking out senior leadership, as opposed to what we saw with Hezbollah, which was more of a ground up approach that the Israelis took. But you know, they built up a significant structure over the years. But you know, again, we're early on. We don't know what the battle damage assessment is inside Iran. What I can tell you is that the United States controls the skies now, and that will lead them to, targeting individuals such as Moshtaba, who Ali Khamenei's son, who just took over, as well as some regime figures such as Ali Larijani, who is basically running the country and responsible for the crackdown and execution and murder of 40,000 civilians.
And does framing the situation as worst case scenario risk justifying a broader military action or escalation in the region?
No, I think that question was posed to him and he answered it. I don't think this is, people are saying this is World War III. No, this is preventing World War III. What we can't have is an Iran that was enriching and reprocessing. Every country that does that has a nuclear weapon. They would be the exception to the rule. And I don't trust them, nor should anyone. We have certain objectives here. The way the regime has lashed out and tried to terrorize the region into, pressuring the United States, their allies in Qatar, let's say the UAE, Saudi, Bahrain, it's having the reverse effect of what they actually wanted. It's pulling people into the orbit of the Trump administration's policy here, which started off as a nuclear, to reduce their nuclear and ballistic stockpiles.
And how might talk of potential leadership outcomes influence Iran's internal politics and the attitude of its population towards both the regime and foreign intervention?
Well, one thing you have to understand about the Iranian people is that 95% of the people hate this regime. These are the people that have been crushed under the boot of this regime. Another thing you have to understand is that over the last several years, they've become increasingly politically mobilized. It started really in 2009, but then it really kicks off in 2017. There are groups on the ground, and these aren't just, these are organized, not just spontaneous, some are spontaneous, but they're organized resistant groups. And also in the diaspora, there's coalition groups that are forming together that really want to see what is a democratic transition to a civilian rule. A country that has a history with it, they have a Senate, the Majlis, which has been there for centuries upon centuries. It's just been packed with hardline clerics right now.
Thank you, Adrian. Please don't go anywhere, as we'll be back with you very shortly. We now have some more breaking news. In a televised address, French President Emmanuel Macron warned Israel against launching a ground operation in Lebanon, calling it a dangerous escalation and a strategic error. He condemned Hezbollah for striking Israel first, saying it made a grave mistake. Macron announced he had ordered the aircraft carrier Charles de Gaulle to sail to the Mediterranean to support France's position. The French president also accused Iran of bearing primary responsibility for the escalating war in the Middle East. Listen in.
Dernières heures, la guerre s'étend au Liban, à partir duquel le Hezbollah a commis la faute majeure de frapper Israël et de mettre les Libanais en danger. Israël serait en train de décider une opération terrestre. Ce serait là aussi une escalade dangereuse et une erreur stratégique. Le Hezbollah doit impérativement cesser toute frappe. Et j'appelle Israël à respecter le territoire libanais et son intégrité.
Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has said that Israel will continue its military actions in Iran and Lebanon with additional force. Netanyahu has also stated that Hezbollah is now dragging the Lebanese people in the conflict and has urged the Lebanese government to protect its people. Let's listen in to his statement.
צריכה להבין, והעם בלבנון צריך להבין, שחיזבאללה גורר אותם למלחמה לא להם, רק בגלל מותו של אותו מרצח המוני שאין להם שום קשר אליו, הם צריכים לדאוג לעצמם, וכדאי שיעשו זאת בהקדם. אנחנו נמשיך לעשות מה שדרוש להגנתנו.
Following these remarks, an Israeli army spokesperson has also confirmed the Israel's military response would persist, noting that the operations are far more than over. Let's listen in to what he has said.
מהמקום הזה יוצאים לתקיפות בלב טהרן, בדחיה בביירות ובכל מקום אחר בו קיים איום על ביטחון מדינת ישראל. אנחנו לא עוצרים לרגע. קצב ועוצמת התקיפות שלנו חסרי תקדים. המשטר האיראני ממשיך לספוג מכות קשות בכל מערכי הליבה שלו. הוא נחלש מיום ליום. אז מה עשינו הלילה? הלילה מטוסי חיל האוויר, בהכוונה מדויקת של אגף המודיעין, תקפו את מתחם ההנהגה האיראני בלב טהרן, המפקדה החשובה והמרכזית ביותר של...
We are now being rejoined again by Adrian. Thank you, Adrian, for joining us back here for this. Does Israel's declaration that it is not stopping mark a shift from limited retaliation to a sustained military campaign?
Well, great question, Ellie. If we look at the conflict that started with Iran, with the Islamic Republic of Iran, there were some actions in Lebanon, in southern Lebanon, that were taking place prior to that. There's a concern on the part of the Israelis, and rightly so, and the ballistic missile that was fired and reached Israel proper today, that was a long-range ballistic missile, which is something that we have not seen from Lebanon. So there's concerns that, yes, they have, during the ceasefire that they hammered out, that they have been rearmed, and there's been different estimates thrown around as far as how much they've been rearmed. But you know, Hezbollah is in a very tight spot. They were supposed to disarm south of the Litani, you know, to create that buffer zone in southern Lebanon. They have not done so. And the Lebanese government is pressuring them more and more. Inside Beirut, you know, they were hit in Dahia neighborhood and some of the neighborhoods that are just, they're Hezbollah neighborhoods. And then there's also been a fracturing in the Bekaa Valley with Hezbollah and some of the Shia tribes there, which I find extremely interesting. Hezbollah has not been the same since it really started launching. It put itself into a war on October 8th, 2023. That's when they entered the fray. And really, yeah, they were completely, I won't say dismantled because they still exist, but they were defanged and their leadership from the ground up was eliminated and their weapons capabilities were significantly diminished.
And is Netanyahu's warning to Lebanon aimed mostly at Hezbollah or to the Lebanese government?
I think it's definitely at Hezbollah. He wants to work with the Lebanese government. The Lebanese government, I mean, we all have to be honest with ourselves. They just don't have the power or the capacity to disarm Hezbollah. It's been tried before and it hasn't been accomplished. Even in their weakened state, I don't think the Lebanese government and the Lebanese armed forces can do it, and UNIFIL isn't going to do it. So, you know, it may take further weakening of Hezbollah, but I don't expect any type of ground invasion, which was alluded to by Macron in his speech.
Thank you so much, Adrian, for joining us here on NewsX World. Thank you. Miri Regev, Israel's Minister of Transport, says that Israel's airspace is set to reopen overnight. This move comes after consultations with security authorities following the closure of airspace on February the 28th due to US-Israeli strikes on Iran. Ben Gurion Airport, Israel's main international hub, will gradually resume flights, starting with one passenger flight per hour in the first phase. Rajev emphasised that the reopening is subject to security developments. She also confirmed efforts to bring Israeli citizens home safely, even as Tehran's airport is being evacuated. Let's listen in.
לאחר הערכות מצב שקיימתי היום, במהלך היום, עם גורמי המקצוע ועם גורמי ביטחון, ושמעתי את המלצתם, אישרתי את הקדמת פתיחת המרחב האווירי שהתכוונו לפתוח אותו בשבוע הבא בעזרת השם. המרחב האווירי ייפתח כבר בלילה שבין רביעי לחמישי באופן מדורג ובכפוף כמובן להתפתחויות הביטחוניות. בזמן שמפנים את שדה התעופה בטהרן, אנו פותחים את המרחב האווירי של מדינת ישראל. אנו עושים הכל כדי להחזיר את אזרחי ישראל הביתה בצורה בטוחה, כמובן באופן מדוד ומדורג בהתאם להנחיות הביטחוניות.
We're now being joined by David K. Johnston, who is an author and journalist, joining us as well from New York. Thank you so much for joining us here today on NewsX World. What signal, or what does the decision to reopen Israel's airspace, even in a limited and phased way, signal about the current security situation amid the conflict?
Well, it tells you that the Netanyahu government and its advisors are confident that they can bring in passenger jets with very little risk of an attack by Iran. At the same time, you can be sure that the Iranian military and intelligence operations are talking about what they should do in terms of their retaliation and their efforts to draw others into this war. For Iran to go after a civilian jetliner would run an enormous risk of making Iran even more of a pariah state than it is now. This is not at all like attacking, for example, an LNG ship or an oil tanker. Clearly the Israelis feel confident that they can protect commercial airliners coming into Ben Gurion Airport, and they probably can, or they wouldn't be doing this. They almost certainly can, or they wouldn't be agreeing to do this.
Thank you, David. Stay with us, please, as we'll join back with you shortly. US President Donald Trump has met with German Chancellor Friedrich Merz at the White House. The two leaders held talks as the US-Israel war against Iran intensified, pushing oil prices to the highest levels since 2024. Trump stressed the war and trade deals would be a key discussion point. Merz, after his meeting with Chinese President Xi Jinping, arrived in Washington aiming to strengthen the partnership with Trump and support Germany's raised defense spending. The visit comes as Germany and France plan to deepen cooperation on nuclear deterrence in response to Russia's threats and the feared instability from the Iran conflict. Listen in.
Well, thank you very much, everybody. We have a meeting with a man who's become a friend of mine, and we've known each other for a little while in some very interesting times, and we get along. Our countries get along very well. We have a great affinity for each other. Well, thank you very much, everybody.
We have to talk about our trade agreement, which I would like to be in place as soon as possible. And we have to talk about Ukraine. There are too many bad guys in this world, actually, and this is an issue we have to talk about because we all want to see this war coming to an end as soon as possible. But Ukraine has to preserve its territory and their security interests, and well.
We're now being joined by David K. Johnston again. Thank you, David, for joining us back here for this. Can US and German cooperation on these issues help stabilise transatlantic relations, or does domestic political pressure in each country complicate the consensus?
Well, certainly domestic pressure complicates things. All politics ultimately are local. But Chancellor Merz arrived in Washington with a very complex portfolio and with a very small needle he had to thread. First of all, he needs a trade deal with the United States, but he made clear to Trump that Germany cannot sign a trade deal if Trump continues his statements that he will have nothing to do with Spain. It has to be with all European countries. And this matters a lot to Germany, which is an export-driven, high-quality manufacturing economy. About 1 in 7 of the luxury cars built in Germany are sold in the United States. So it's a very important source of foreign earnings for Germany. Secondly, Merz, you noticed, was very carefully calibrated in what he said about the war in Ukraine. He made it a point not to mention Putin. He only implied there was a bad guy there, and that's clearly to Merz Putin, because the Europeans and the Germans in particular need to keep Trump on the ranch with regard to Ukraine. And they're trying to find out in Europe how they can get Donald Trump to stop pushing Kremlin points about occupying parts of Ukraine that the Russian army has been unable to capture and holding on to the parts they have. So Merz was trying very hard, and I thought handled himself very well today in not enraging Trump, not stirring up Trump's animus and anger, and also not in any way upsetting Trump about the fact that, you know, Trump is just an appallingly ignorant person who has no deep understanding of any of the world issues in which he is, by default, the biggest player.
And does aligning on the Iran crisis suggest a deeper US-Europe strategic partnership, or are there still major policy differences to resolve?
Well, there is a deep concern among the Europeans and the Canadians about keeping NATO together, despite all of Trump's efforts to undermine NATO. Secondly, Merz has clearly stated that the German government is not going to in any way be involved in this war. So, for example, Keir Starmer, the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, has allowed the use of military bases for refueling for aircraft attacking Iran. Merz has made it clear that won't happen. Now, Trump says that the U.S. has access to some military assets in Germany. Well, yeah, we have big bases there, but Merz is making it clear we're not saying to the Americans, you can take off from Germany and go drop bombs in Iran. Similarly, the Nordic countries have said the same thing. They will have nothing to do with this. So you're seeing the United Kingdom, France under Macron, Merz come up with slightly different positions about this, but all of them want to avoid being drawn into what looks to be a protracted war over Iran.
Thank you so much, David, for joining us here today on NewsX World. It's a pleasure speaking with you. According to reports, the US financial services industry is on high alert for potential cyber attacks amid escalating tensions with Iran. Executives and analysts have reported an increase in monitoring efforts, with concerns that Iran-linked cyber attacks could target US financial operations, especially following the killing of Iran's supreme leader Ali Khamenei. Reports suggest that industry leaders, including Todd Kelsman from the SIFMA, reassured that the sector is prepared to respond to these threats by established protocols through exercises simulating major cyber emergencies. That's all we have time for. Keep watching NewsX World for more news updates from around the world.